Sinister Tales here. Before we get into today's video, I want to quickly remind you to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. If you have any thoughts about the stories you hear, please drop them down in the comments. I really do love reading what you all have to say. If you've got a true scary story of your own that you'd like me to narrate, check the links in the description. You'll find my email, Facebook, and Twitter. You can message me on any of those, and I'll do my best to get your story into a video as soon as I can. If you decide to send something in, please include how you'd like to be credited, the title of your story if it has one, and any themes or categories it might fit under. With all that out of the way, let's get right into today's true scary stories. I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again tomorrow. This happened several years ago. It started one night when I was driving home from work. It was pretty late, a little after 10 p.m. My job at the time was about half an hour from home, and my house was tucked away out in the country. Lots of woods, fields, and not many neighbors. That night I was on a quiet road just a few miles from my house when I saw him. A man standing at the side of the road with his arm out, thumb up, clearly trying to hitchhike. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen out there. I'd never seen a single hitchhiker in that area. There wasn't even a sidewalk, just trees and ditch. I had no idea how he'd gotten there in the first place. I had zero intention of picking him up. As I passed, he turned his head, waved, and really tried to flag me down. I would have been insane to stop for him. I kept driving and reached home shortly after. A couple of days later, I was out again, this time coming back from the nearest grocery store instead of work. It was dark but not very late, maybe around 8 p.m. as I was pulling out of the store and about to merge onto the highway. I saw him again, standing on the sidewalk. At first I didn't recognize him, but when it clicked, I couldn't believe it. What were the odds? He was still in town, still hanging around. I just stared for a second, then drove home and tried not to think too much about it. A few nights later, my schedule had me working late again. My hours back then were unpredictable. I never really knew when I'd get off. That night, I finally clocked out, drove home, and turned onto my street. My street is very quiet. Big wooded yards, houses spaced far apart. It's a great place if you like privacy. As I was driving down it, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The hitchhiker was there again. He was on my street this time, actually hitchhiking, arm out, trying to wave me down. He had a backpack on and stared straight at my car as I approached. For a second, I seriously considered stopping just to ask what on earth he was doing there. I knew he didn't live on my street. I doubted he even lived anywhere near there. And if he did, why would he be out hitchhiking in the dark on a back road? The whole thing gave me a really bad feeling, so I drove past him, turned into my driveway a few seconds later and parked. I went inside still thinking about how weird it was, but I didn't call the police or anything. I just tried to brush it off. When I work late, it always takes me a while to unwind. I can't just walk in the door and fall asleep. So about an hour later, around midnight, I was in the living room, eating and watching TV. For some reason, I suddenly felt like I needed to look out the front window. When I did, I saw a figure standing in the yard near one of the trees. I squinted and realized it was the same man. My front yard is big and partly wooded, and he was standing near the line of trees that separates my yard from the street. He was just standing there facing my house. I had no idea if he could see me. It was very dark and he was pretty far away. I turned away from the window and grabbed my phone to dial 911. When I looked back, he was gone. There were 100 places he could have disappeared to in the dark. I stared out that window for several minutes, but I couldn't see him anywhere. Then I went around the house, checking every window, trying to spot him. Nothing. I told myself he must have wandered off somewhere else. I went back to the TV and tried to relax, but I couldn't stop glancing out the window every few seconds, convinced he'd come back. Then someone tried the front door. The handle rattled hard, like somebody was really working at it. I jumped up, grabbed my phone again, and peeked out the front window. He was standing right there at my door. I backed away from the window and called the police, double-checking every lock I could reach. I didn't yell at him, didn't say a word. I just wanted officers there as fast as possible. They told me someone would be there within a few minutes. Eventually, I looked out again. He was gone. I did another round of every window, no sign of him. When the police arrived, I figured he'd gotten away. I gave them his description and they offered to search the property. To my surprise and horror, they actually found him. He was still in my yard, hiding behind my shed. The bigger shock was what they found when they ran his name. He was wanted for an armed robbery in another city about an hour away. My guess is that he was trying to get out of the area and had no car and no money, so he'd been hitchhiking. I don't know how long he'd been hanging around my town, but he creeped me out more than anyone I've ever seen. I'm extremely glad I called the police when I did. This is a quick story that happened to my husband and me about 3 years ago, around the time we got married. We're both pretty unconventional people. Strange jobs, odd hobbies, weird senses of humor. It's what drew us to each other. It feels like people like Jake and me aren't made very often anymore, and when we found each other, we just held on. After 2 years of dating, we knew we wanted to get married and start a family. Jake proposed, I said yes, and we started planning. We both have small extended families, so we decided on a small, low-budget ceremony. Weddings are insanely expensive, and we wanted to put more money into our future together. My family was fine with that. Jake's family, not so much. His mom, especially, had a big problem with it. She's very religious, some form of Christianity, though I'm not sure which, and she couldn't wrap her head around the idea of a non-traditional, small wedding. During the planning stages, she kept pushing for their pastor or preacher or whatever to be heavily involved. Jake and I were both firmly against that and already had someone in mind. My gay best friend, Paul, was going to officiate. His mom never outright said anything directly insulting, but the look on her face said everything. A few weeks before the wedding, Jake and I went over to his parents' house for dinner. We were expecting a normal, quiet evening, pasta, coffee, dessert. After we ate, his family insisted we stay for coffee and dessert. Just as his dad was about to bring the coffee out, the doorbell rang. Jake's mom practically ran to the door, all excited. We could hear her bubbly voice greeting whoever it was. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but from the look on Jake's face, it wasn't good. I whispered, "Who is it?" He said quietly, "Just be cool. I'll handle it." A moment later, they came back into the dining room. His mom was grinning from ear to ear, and beside her was a big man with a huge red beard, bald on top but with fiery hair around the sides. "Wow, Jake, look at you, bud," he boomed. "Last time I saw you, you were about 5'3". Now you're a big old guy, huh?" Then he laughed at his own joke like it was the funniest thing in the world. They made small talk for a bit, then Jake did the introductions. "This is my fiancée, Tabby. Tabby, this is Minister Mark." I felt my eyes about to pop out of my head as I shook his hand. I couldn't believe his parents had done this behind our backs. Still, I didn't say anything at first. Eventually, the real purpose of this little ambush came out. They started in on us, trying to get us to reconsider and have Mark marry us in their church. Jake was livid. He kept telling them our plans were already made. We weren't changing them. We wanted a small, non-traditional ceremony for a lot of reasons, including budget. Mark made a strange face and asked what non-traditional meant. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. In an annoyed tone, I said, "It means not traditional. I'm not wearing a white dress. He'll see me before the wedding. We don't believe in those superstitions. We're not getting married in a church, and we're not paying for some fancy banquet hall." The room went dead quiet. Mark's face turned bright red with anger. Jake tried to smooth things over and translate what I'd said, even though I'd meant exactly what I said. After a while, we all left and went our separate ways. I was furious at his mom, but I knew how she was and tried to tolerate it. This is where people usually tell me I'm crazy and it was probably unrelated, but I know what I saw that night. Later, Jake and I were in bed about to fall asleep when we heard a loud crash. We both jumped up and went down the hall. The side door had been bashed open. It was a calm night outside. No wind, no storm, so we knew it wasn't weather. And the noise had been too loud for that anyway. We crept around the house. Aside from the damaged side door, there was no obvious sign of a break-in. We were about to head back toward the bedroom when I noticed Jake standing stock, still in the kitchen. I looked over and he motioned for me to get back. I didn't run, but I did step back while he grabbed one of his golf clubs that he kept near the side door and started tiptoeing toward it. There was a moment of complete silence, and then we heard heavy footsteps pounding up from the basement. We both yelled in shock. Jake froze for a second. Seeing someone burst out of your basement will do that to you. The footsteps came straight toward the side door. A large man wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face rushed over and started working at the door, like he was unlocking it to leave. Jake snapped out of it and swung the golf club like a bat. The man grunted, his hat flew off, and he bolted out into the night. As he ran, I got a clear view of his face through the window. I swear it was Minister Mark. I told Jake I thought it was him. He didn't believe me. He said there was no way Mark would do something like that. He admitted the guy's build looked similar, but said it was too dark to be sure his hair was red. He claimed he hadn't really gotten a good look. We reported the break-in. The police checked out Mark, and apparently his alibi checked out. They said his story matched where he was supposed to be, but I know what I saw. The more I replayed it, the more certain I became it was him. I don't know what he planned to do. Maybe scare us into doing things his way, maybe something worse. I really don't know. I was furious for weeks. Since my parents have a big house, I begged Jake to stay there with me for a few days until everything calmed down. We eventually got married exactly the way we'd planned. His parents never mentioned the minister again, and we never saw him after that. We never had another break-in either, and we're still in the same house. Maybe it really was some random intruder and my brain just decided to see what it wanted. But deep down, I know I saw red hair disappearing into the dark. The reason I'm telling this now is that 3 years later, completely out of nowhere, my husband said, "You know what? I think I did see his red beard that night. I think it was Minister Mark." A couple of years ago, I finally married my longtime girlfriend. We dated for 2 years, then stayed engaged for 4. We figured it was smartest to finish school and get our careers started before fully tying the knot. The wedding turned out beautiful, but it was almost destroyed at the last second. And even now, I'd be lying if I said there isn't a dark cloud hanging over that day. To protect my family, especially my wife's side, I'm not going to use anyone's real name here. They've already been through enough, and I don't want strangers digging around in their lives. When my wife and I first started dating, I met her cousin. I'll call him Mike. Mike was wild, plain and simple. At first, I actually liked going out with him. He was what I'd call a wild card. Loud, funny, didn't care what he said, and every night with him felt like something crazy was bound to happen. But as I got older, his antics stopped being fun. He seemed frozen in that early 20s, chaos-loving mindset. It got harder and harder to be around him. By the time we got engaged, we barely saw him except at family gatherings. We'd hear stories from his girlfriend's parents about how he was constantly in some sort of legal trouble. He didn't see himself as a criminal, though. Mike thought he was doing what society failed to do. His words, not mine. He'd break into and rob very wealthy businesses and homes. He even ambushed employees from companies he knew were well off. In his mind, anyone working for rich people had to be corrupt. Watching someone I'd once genuinely enjoyed spiral into that kind of person was depressing. Fast forward to our engagement party. Mike showed up, and at first it was nice catching up. He'd recently gotten out of a short jail stint, and seemed like maybe he was trying to straighten his life out. At the party, I introduced him to my best man, Nick. The 3 of us chatted about sports and random stuff. At some point, Nick mentioned that he was a cop. Mike's expression changed instantly. In the middle of the party, he went off. He launched into a tirade about how all cops are corrupt and how Nick should be in prison for the crimes of every other officer that ever lived. We ended up having to remove Mike from the party. After we got him out, people calmed down, made a few jokes, and we got back to celebrating. Nick is one of the rare cops who genuinely cares about justice, not just enforcing rules for the sake of it. He hates writing pointless tickets and lets people off with warnings whenever he can. He and his family actually moved from another state because the laws there were so strict that he felt he couldn't separate real justice from blind regulation. Unfortunately, none of that mattered to Mike. To him, every cop was irredeemably evil. Not long after the party, my friends and I went away for my bachelor weekend. It wasn't anything like the crazy movie version. We rented a cabin in the woods near a small town, went into town for food and a couple of drinks at a dive bar, then went back to the cabin to hang out, play video games, and do country stuff, all night like we were 12 again. That was exactly the kind of bachelor party I wanted. Around midnight or 1 in the morning, a few of my friends noticed the motion-activated light had come on out back. I ran over to the sliding glass door and looked outside. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed 2 wet footprints right outside the door. I laughed, assuming one of the guys was messing with me. I'm a big horror fan, and it seemed like the exact kind of prank they'd pull, but everyone denied it. We went outside to check. Nick led us around the cabin. We found a trail of wet footprints going from the deck out into the grass. Once they hit the grass, we had no way to tell which direction they'd gone. That part was unnerving. We reported it, but there wasn't much the local cops could do with some wet footprints and a suspect who was already long gone. We decided to stick it out at the cabin. Every creak and every gust of wind had us jumping, but being in a group at least felt somewhat safe. Around 5 a.m., I was still awake in the living room. I happened to glance at the sliding door and saw someone peering in at me through the glass. I yelled to wake everyone up, but by the time they were on their feet, all they saw was a figure sprinting off into the woods. That was it for us. We packed everything and left. We called the cops again and let the property owner know what had happened. Once we were safely home, it turned into one of those crazy bachelor party stories we all shared. We assumed it had just been some local weirdo trying to spook the out-of-towners. A bit later came the rehearsal dinner. Afterward, a group of us went out for a few drinks. Since I'd had some, Nick offered to drive me home. On the way back, we noticed a car riding our bumper, high beams on. Nick tried to change lanes and adjust his speed to get away, but the car mimicked every move. At that point, he knew whoever it was doing it on purpose. He called one of his buddies who was on duty and explained what was going on. His friend said he was only about 5 minutes away. I still don't know why Nick did what he did next, but he pulled over. The car behind us pulled over too. Nick told me to stay in the car and did the same. A person got out of the other car, wearing a mask, and walked over to Nick's window. When he got there, he demanded that Nick get out of the car. I was terrified and praying Nick's buddy would show up fast. Nick tried to talk him down, but the guy wasn't interested. He started pounding on the door with some kind of object. I couldn't tell what it was, and that scared me even more. Then he smashed the window and reached in, trying to drag Nick out. I think that's what Nick had been waiting for. As soon as the man leaned in, Nick kicked the door open, slamming it into him and knocking him to the ground. Nick kicked the object out of his hand, sending it flying, then managed to pin him. The man screamed and thrashed, but Nick kept him down until his friend arrived a minute or two later and cuffed him. I felt sick when they walked him past us with the mask off. It was my soon-to-be wife's cousin, Mike. After the legal mess was handled that night, I went home and told my fiancée everything. She was mortified and thankful we were okay. Mike confessed that he'd targeted Nick strictly because he was a cop. He said he wanted to teach him a lesson, that all those cops needed to be punished, and that he was doing the family a favor by saving them from this monster. Thankfully, the only actual monster was taken away. It was a dark night and a bleak morning, But once the wedding started, the weight of it all seemed to lift. We had a beautiful ceremony. It still blows my mind that sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they're your own blood. A few years back, I worked the overnight shift at a hotel. The place was a fairly average-sized property, maybe a bit bigger than average, with no restaurants or bars attached, just a lot of rooms. As the overnight front desk clerk, my job was usually easy. Most nights, almost nothing happened. People came and went, but most didn't need anything from me. I didn't mind being up all night when it was that quiet. This took place a little after 2 a.m. one night. I was at the front desk, which faces the lobby and the elevators. To my left, there was a lounge area and a hallway that led to the first-floor rooms. Everything was totally still when a man walked in through the front doors. He went right past the desk without a word. I assumed he was a guest coming back to his room. He looked completely ordinary, average height, light brown hair, mid-30s. He walked down the hallway and disappeared. About 5 minutes later, I saw him again, this time crossing into a different hallway on the other side of the lobby. I still didn't think much of it. Then I saw him a third time, again moving from one hallway to another, just within my line of sight. That's when it started to feel off. He wasn't doing anything blatantly wrong, but something about it nagged at me. A few minutes later, I decided to get some water from the lounge. To get there, I had to walk past one of the hallways. As I passed, I noticed someone a ways down the corridor. It was the same man. He was standing in front of a room door, fumbling with it like he couldn't get inside. He might have been locked out of his room, or he might have been trying to get into someone else's. I started walking toward him and was about to ask if he needed help when he turned and saw me. Before I could say anything, he turned away and walked down the hall in the other direction, disappearing around a corner. Now it felt very suspicious. I started to think maybe he didn't have a room there at all. I went back to the desk and pulled up the security cameras. We had cameras on every hallway, but the image quality was awful. Details were hard to see. I flipped through the feeds until I spotted him. He walked down a hallway, stopped at a random door, tried the handle and seemed to knock. He loitered there for a while, pacing, then went back to the door again. That was enough for me. I decided to go confront him and see what exactly he was doing. I got up and headed in the direction I'd seen him on the monitor. The first floor layout was more confusing than the upper floors, with multiple intersecting hallways. When I reached the start of the hallway he was in, I saw him about 100 feet away. As soon as I came into view, his eyes snapped to me. I asked, "What are you doing?" Without a word, he suddenly started sprinting at me full speed. It was the last reaction I expected. I backed up fast and turned, heading for the front of the hotel. His footsteps were pounding behind me, getting closer. By the time I hit the lobby, he was much closer than I wanted him to be. I decided to run outside to see if he'd follow. I bolted through the doors and into the parking lot. He was still coming, still at a full run and way too close. There was no way I'd make it to my car before he caught me, so instead I ran straight across the street. There was a 24-hour gas station a short distance down, and I sprinted there and dove inside. When I turned, I saw that he'd stopped. He hadn't crossed the street. He was just standing in the hotel lot. After a moment, he went back inside. I called the police and reported a suspicious man who'd been trying random room doors and had chased me when I confronted him. The police arrived within about a minute. They went into the hotel, where the man clearly still was. He tried to run from them but was quickly caught and hauled out. He never said what he was doing there or why he'd been trying to get into those rooms. After talking with the officers for a bit, I went back to the desk, but I was shaken. That night made me seriously reconsider working overnights, and not long after, I switched to a different schedule. My mom warned me not to work at a bar, but they were hiring. I had just turned 21, and the idea of working around alcohol all night sounded fun. Plus, the place was also a restaurant, so I figured it wouldn't be as sketchy as a typical bar. She kept insisting it would be. For the first few months, things were fine. We'd have the occasional bar fight, but it was nothing we couldn't handle, just drunk people being drunk. Then this one woman started coming in every night. She was obviously high on something and constantly tried to stir up trouble. She'd pick fights with other women and harass men who clearly wanted nothing to do with her. One night she got beaten so badly outside that when I found her on the ground, I genuinely thought she was dead. I called an ambulance and they took her away. I didn't hear anything about her for about 3 weeks. Then, out of nowhere, she walked into the bar again, only this time she looked sober. She thanked me for saving her life. She said the fact that I'd cared enough to get her help made her rethink her choices, and she was trying to get better. I was genuinely happy for her. Then she told me she was overjoyed that I was in love with her. I didn't even know how to respond. I certainly wasn't in love with her and had no clue how she'd come to that conclusion. I tried to be gentle. I told her I wasn't in love with her. I'd help because no one deserves to just die on the street. That was it. Her expression went from grateful to furious in a heartbeat. She started screaming that I was lying, that I just didn't want to profess my love in front of everyone. The entire bar went silent and stared. I begged her to calm down, but she spiraled like a tantruming child. She said she'd only stop if I admitted I loved her. Against my better judgment, just to get her to stop and to spare myself more humiliation, I muttered, "Okay, I love you. Now you need to leave before I change my mind." That satisfied her. She brightened, giggled like a little girl, said she'd see me later, and ran out of the bar. As soon as the door shut behind her, I let out a huge sigh of relief. People around me started laughing, and eventually I laughed along. It was ridiculous in a way, but part of me was very worried about what might happen if she came back. That night my girlfriend was coming to meet me at the bar so she could stay over at my place. It was shortly after 2 a.m. when my shift ended. She came in, I walked her out, my arm around her shoulders and hers around my waist. We stepped out of the building. What neither of us knew was that the woman from earlier had been waiting outside for me the entire time. When she saw us together, she exploded. She screamed that I was cheating on her, demanding to know how I could betray the woman I loved. My girlfriend was completely confused. I told her this woman was crazy. The woman didn't like that. She yelled that if I thought she was crazy, she'd show me how crazy she could be. I honestly thought she was about to pull a knife and try to kill my girlfriend. Instead, she just stalked off down the road until she disappeared. My girlfriend laughed it off a little, but I could tell she was unsettled. I said everything would be fine, that the woman was probably just trying to scare us. Unfortunately, she'd succeeded. Over the next week, the woman kept coming back to the bar and always sat in my section. She flirted endlessly the entire time I served her. I brushed her off and refused every advance, but it didn't faze her. She started waiting outside for me after my shifts and following me to my car. The last straw was when she grabbed my butt while I was unlocking my car door. In my mind, that crossed a line that justified pushing her away. I shoved her off me and she fell to the ground. She looked shocked and confused, but I didn't care. I yelled at her to leave me alone and told her if she ever set foot on the property again, I'd call the police. She just lay there with a dazed look while I got in my car and drove away. I had no idea how much that one moment would escalate things. A few days later, my girlfriend told me she'd been seeing the woman all over town. It was really freaking her out. She felt like the woman was following her on purpose and was terrified she might get attacked. I told her the woman was probably harmless, but if it made her feel better, she could stay with me for a while and I'd go everywhere with her. She agreed. Every day she'd meet me at the bar after work. We'd drive back to my place, and we practically did everything together. And sure enough, I started noticing the woman everywhere too. Different places around town, different times, always somewhere nearby. I didn't like the feeling that we were being stalked, but I also didn't think another confrontation would help. Then it became a very real problem. We left a store one evening around 8 p.m. It was already dark. When we got to my car, the woman was standing there waiting. My girlfriend went to the passenger side. I heard a grunt and then a thud. She fell. The woman was standing over her, smiling this crazed smile, holding a knife covered in blood. My girlfriend screamed that she'd been stabbed. I did the only thing I could think to do. I lunged at the woman, tackled her to the ground, and slammed her head into the pavement. I pried the knife from her hand and flung it away. She begged me to stop, saying over and over that she loved me. I didn't care. I got up and stomped on her stomach as hard as I could to make sure she wouldn't get back up and go after my girlfriend again. I saw blood soaking through her shirt. She was getting weaker. I grabbed my phone and called 911. Officers arrived before the ambulance. They helped me control my girlfriend's bleeding as best they could and arrested the woman, who continued to shout that she loved me even as they shoved her into the back of the patrol car. I asked what would happen to her. They told me they were taking her to the hospital first since I'd beaten her badly. An ambulance got there shortly after. By then, my girlfriend was losing consciousness. She'd lost a terrifying amount of blood and needed help immediately. I followed the ambulance to the nearest trauma center. They rushed her straight into surgery. The woman had sliced her abdominal aorta, causing massive internal and external bleeding. The only reason she survived was that the artery hadn't fully burst, and the trauma team had been warned and were ready the second she arrived. The woman was eventually charged with first-degree attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. I was satisfied with that sentence. I was even more grateful that my girlfriend made a full recovery. Looking back, taking that bar job wasn't my smartest move. I never meant to make anyone obsessed with me. It's crazy that one simple act of compassion could turn someone into a violent stalker. This is a story that still pops into my head from time to time. I've only told it to a few people, but it deserves to be shared. It's one of the scariest things that ever happened to me as a kid. When I was around 10, my mom finally decided to start working on getting her driver's license. She struggled quite a bit with the lessons, so my dad decided to give her extra practice outside of what she did with her instructor. He wanted her to pass on the first try. At the time, my brother and I were taking swimming lessons at a nearby university. Behind a wooded area by the campus was a huge student parking lot, surrounded by trees. On weekends, it was practically empty. My dad saw it as the perfect place to practice. They brought my brother and me along, of course. We were too young to stay home alone. We took a football so we'd have something to do while they drove around. We got there later in the evening. My parents started practicing their driving, circling the lot. My brother and I quickly got bored and asked if we could go play on the small grassy field by the edge of the parking lot near the entrance exit. They said yes, since they could still see us from the car. After a while, my parents ended up driving all the way to the other end of the lot, maybe 300 to 400 meters away. That's when a white Toyota pulled in. We were playing right near the entrance. The car pulled in, turned around, and stopped on my right side, facing the exit. The driver rolled down his window and introduced himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, young, good-looking, maybe around 30. On the passenger seat was a woman with long blonde hair, her face hidden behind a newspaper. In the back seat was a baby in a car seat. Then things got weird fast. Thomas told us he was with the police and that we needed to get in the car immediately because he had to talk to us about something important. My brother actually took a couple of steps toward the car, but I instinctively stuck my arm out and blocked him. Something felt wrong. The woman kept her face covered and stayed silent. Thomas raised his voice and repeated that we had to get in the car or he'd have to get out and punish us. We both froze. Then the woman slowly lowered the newspaper. In the calmest, most motherly voice imaginable, she said, "Just listen to the man." She was young and pretty, someone you'd never expect to hurt anyone. That almost worked on me. Then I started screaming as loudly as I could. What we didn't realize was that my dad had already seen what was happening. He was running full speed toward us from behind their car. The road winding through the lot made it impossible to just drive straight to us, so he parked and run. He shouted, "Hey, who the hell are you? Get away from my children." As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized we weren't alone, he slammed the car into gear and shot out of the parking lot. He looked absolutely terrified. My dad was furious. He told us to hurry to the car. For the next hour, we drove around looking for that white Toyota. He wanted to find the guy himself. Eventually, he calmed down and decided to call the police instead. We never found out who those people were, but that day taught me not to ever judge a book by its cover. Some of the friendliest, most normal-looking people can still have evil intentions toward you or your loved ones. I don't know exactly what they had planned for us, but I know one thing: they definitely weren't with the police. Having a gross, unprofessional manager in food service is about as bad as it gets. You'll understand why after this. I was a 16-year-old girl working at a restaurant. I'd been there for about 6 months. I got my work permit at 15 and a half and had been there ever since. My first manager was great, kind, understanding, and easy to work with. She made the job almost enjoyable. Then she moved away and had to quit. I'd hoped the assistant manager would get promoted, but of course that would have been too easy. Instead, corporate hired some guy none of us knew and who'd never worked there before. He showed up on his first day, wearing clothes so stained and torn that at first I thought he was a random homeless guy wandering in. He went into the office to change, but even fresh clothes didn't hide the smell of someone who clearly hadn't showered in days. At first, his behavior seemed normal enough, at least on the surface. He mostly hid in his office and only came out when there was a customer complaint. That was fine by me. He gave me a weird feeling, so seeing him less was a relief. After a couple of months, he started coming out more. That's when the real him showed. He hit on every adult woman who walked through the doors. When they shot him down, every time, he'd loudly insult them the moment they left. He'd rant all day about how unbelievable it was that any woman would turn down a man like him. Those of us who were younger tried to keep our heads down, but that didn't last. He eventually shifted his attention from customers to us. It didn't matter that most of us were underage. He'd ask what kind of underwear we were wearing and make disgusting comments. If anyone called him out, he'd laugh and say we were the creepy ones for taking him seriously, claiming it was all just jokes. That didn't last either. Soon, he quit pretending it was a joke and made it very clear he was serious. One coworker didn't help matters. She actually slept with him the day she turned 18. It blew up fast. His wife came in, screamed at her for sleeping with her husband, and harassed her all day. The girl quit on the spot, and I never saw or heard from her again. That whole thing only inflated his ego. Now he thought he was irresistible, and that all of us secretly wanted him. He'd stand way too close to me and whisper graphic things he wanted to do to me in my ear. One day it was so bad I honestly thought I was going to throw up. When none of us responded positively, he went back to aggressively flirting with customers. One time, he tried to hit on a girl who was maybe 12 years old. I'm not exaggerating. He didn't realize her father was standing right behind her. He later tried to claim he didn't know she was that young, but she very obviously looked like a kid. We started getting bad reviews online, Google, Yelp, everywhere, specifically calling him out as gross and creepy. Upper management eventually had a talk with him. I happened to overhear some of it through his office door. They didn't tell him to stop. They told him to be more careful and discreet about it. I was disgusted that they wouldn't take any of it seriously. Meanwhile, I spent weeks watching him harass my coworker Leslie. It was undeniable harassment, unwanted touching, blatant leering, nasty comments. We reported it multiple times and nothing changed. Leslie finally went to the police. They said they wanted to help, but there wasn't enough proof to do anything. She quit, and on her way out, she urged the rest of us to leave too. The only reason I stayed was because I was saving up for a car and was so close to my goal. I just needed a couple more weeks. That's when he really turned his attention on me. Every shift I had with him, he'd grab me, in multiple places, slap my butt, and make filthy advances. I left work every day feeling sick and ashamed, crying on the walk home. I didn't tell my parents because I just wanted to get the money for my car, and I knew they'd make a huge deal out of it. He kept it up those last few weeks. Finally, the day came when I was ready to quit. I was nervous but excited. I walked over to his office. Through the small window, I saw an air mattress on the floor. I knocked. He opened the door wearing only his underwear. I was grossed out but honestly not surprised at that point. I asked about the mattress. He said his wife had kicked him out and he'd been living there for the past month. I told him I was quitting. His response was, "Well, at least now I can be with you since I won't be your boss anymore," and he tried to grab me. I slapped him across the face as hard as I could. Another coworker saw it and started laughing at him. He yelled that he was going to call the police. I told him they wouldn't do anything. He had no evidence. He turned to the other employees and said he had witnesses, but every single one of them denied seeing anything. I turned around, walked out, and never went back. Years later, I heard he'd been arrested for forcing himself on a woman. This time, she had DNA evidence. I was grateful she came forward. She probably saved a lot of other women from going through what we did. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here again. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing if you feel like it. If you have any feedback for me, I'd love to hear it down in the comments. If you'd like to send in a story or contact me for any reason, you'll find links to my social media in the description: Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter. You can message me on any of those, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you do send a story, please include in the subject line or tagline what the story is called, if it has a title, what kind of story it is, and how you'd like to be credited in the description. Including as much detail as you're comfortable with and using clear grammar will give you the best chance of appearing in a future video. That's about it for now. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.